Lando Norris just got thrown out of the Las Vegas Grand Prix, and the entire Formula One world is not ready for what this means. A microscopic floor measurement turned his race upside down and created the biggest championship twist we have seen all season. You are about to hear how this single ruling transformed Max Verstappen's chances and placed him in the strongest position he has held with only 2 races remaining. Stay right here, because this moment is so explosive that it could decide who becomes world champion in 2025. The moment the officials concluded their post-race inspection in Las Vegas, the entire narrative of the weekend changed, because the measurements taken under both McLaren cars showed that the skid blocks had worn below the 9mm limit required by the technical regulations. This discovery did not come through dramatic radio messages or sudden incidents on track. It emerged quietly in the steward's room, where engineers studied data that would send shockwaves across the paddock. What looked like a solid night for McLaren instantly transformed into a regulatory crisis that no team can escape once the numbers fall outside the legal range. As the findings were relayed to team representatives, the seriousness of the situation became undeniable. Each measurement taken beneath the floors showed consistent values below the mandated threshold, and the officials repeated the procedure with certified tools to eliminate any possibility of error. These tools can detect differences smaller than a single grain of fine sand, and they recorded the same figures every time. When readings remain identical through repeated checks, the rulebook leaves no space for appeal. The team that had believed it secured a vital result suddenly understood that the regulations were about to overturn everything achieved on track. The shock spread rapidly through the paddock, because the disqualification of both McLaren cars is one of the rarest outcomes in modern Formula One. Engineers, strategists, and journalists immediately began recalculating championship scenarios, because this ruling triggered a dramatic shift in the balance of power. Lando Norris had crossed the line, believing he had extended his lead in the standings. Oscar Piastri had achieved a result that preserved his mathematical hopes. Yet all of it vanished in an instant once the officials confirmed that both cars violated the technical threshold by fractions of a millimeter. These details mattered deeply in a sport built on precision. Teams across the grid were stunned, because penalties of this magnitude normally arise from incidents during the race, not quiet checks carried out hours after the checkered flag. The ruling arrived well after most crews had begun preparing their equipment for transport, and this created a sense of disbelief as the standings were rewritten before their eyes. McLaren experienced the emotional whiplash of celebrating strong finishes and then confronting the reality that neither result would count. Meanwhile, the rivals who believed the championship margin had widened suddenly discovered that the entire race weekend had swung back in their favor. This change affected Max Verstappen more than anyone else, because his deficit, which seemed nearly impossible to close, contracted dramatically. Before the ruling, Norris appeared to hold a commanding position with a lead that required perfection from Verstappen to overcome. Yet after the exclusion, the standings shifted so sharply that Verstappen found himself only 24 points behind, with 60 points still available across the final 2 race weekends. The Dutch driver, who had left the circuit content with a strong performance but resigned to the gap, now had a new reason to believe that the title remained within reach. As teams left Las Vegas, the conversation centered on how quickly the season had changed direction. A single measurement under the floor of each McLaren had overturned the balance of the championship and created new pressure for every driver still mathematically involved. Norris faced the shock of going from control to vulnerability. Piastri saw his gap erased and his margin for error vanish. Verstappen discovered that his path toward another world title was no longer blocked by mathematics. This new context sets the stage for an intense and unpredictable fight over the final 2 rounds, shaped entirely by what happened in that inspection room. The measurements taken under Oscar Piastri's car formed the foundation of the decision, because every value recorded by the officials fell below the minimum legal threshold. The front left surface measured 8.96 millimeters, the front right measured 8.74, and the rear right showed 8.90. These numbers were recorded using certified tools that can detect changes smaller than the diameter of a human hair. When such instruments confirm the same value repeatedly, the conclusion becomes inescapable. The floor of the McLaren did not meet the regulation, and no argument or interpretation could alter that reality. Lando Norris's car presented an equally clear violation when the technical delegates performed the same inspection procedures beneath his chassis. The reading showed 8.88 millimeters on the front right reference position and 8.93 on the rear right. McLaren engineers observed the entire process and requested a second series of measurements to verify the data. The officials repeated the steps in complete transparency and the results did not change. Consistency between measurements is essential in technical rulings, and in this case the numbers aligned with complete precision, which removed any possible margin for appeal. The rule regarding skid block thickness is one of the strictest in the technical code because it protects aerodynamic fairness across the entire field. A floor that runs lower than intended can generate performance advantages through increased ground effect and aerodynamically induced load. For that reason, the regulation does not evaluate intent and does not allow mitigation. Any reading below 9 mm results in automatic exclusion from the classification. Earlier precedents from the same championship season confirmed that the officials were required to apply the same decision to McLaren that they had applied to other teams under identical conditions. The announcement arrived more than 4 hours after the checkered flag, which added an extra layer of drama to the situation. During that gap, McLaren had been preparing to leave the circuit, believing that the second place and fourth place finishes were secure. Meanwhile, Verstappen had already begun focusing on the next round, believing he remained more than 40 points behind in the standings. When the officials released their final document, the paddock felt the magnitude immediately. Hours after the race had ended, the result was overturned and the championship table had shifted in one decisive moment, driven entirely by technical fact. The recalculated standings revealed the extent of the upheaval. Norris fell to 390 points, losing the 18 points he expected to claim. Piastri dropped to 366 points after his 12-point deduction. Verstappen, who sat on 366 points, gained ground not through on-track performance but through the enforcement of the regulation. The gap that had seemed overwhelming earlier in the evening had collapsed to only 24 points. With 60 points available across the final events, the championship had transformed from a steady lead into a volatile battle. The psychological effect of these revised numbers altered the dynamic of the season instantly. Norris shifted from confidence to damage control, knowing that one poor session could cost him everything. Piastri found himself tied with Verstappen, which created pressure from both behind and ahead. Verstappen, who believed the title had slipped out of reach, stood suddenly within striking distance. These figures demonstrated with absolute clarity how a fraction of a millimeter beneath the floor can reshape an entire championship. Las Vegas did not just change the standings. It changed the mindset of every contender heading into the final rounds. The technical explanation for the disqualification begins with the behavior of ground effect aerodynamics, which dominate the current Formula One regulations. These cars depend on stable airflow beneath the floor, and any unexpected vertical movement can transform that airflow dramatically. McLaren explained that during the Las Vegas weekend the team encountered levels of porpoising that exceeded their predictive models. This oscillation forced the underside of the car into repeated contact with the track surface, which increased the erosion rate of the skid block. When a car strikes the asphalt at high speed, the wear accelerates quickly and can push the thickness below the minimum requirement even without the team intending it. The limited practice running throughout the weekend intensified the problem because McLaren did not have the track time required to measure how aggressively the car compressed at full speed across the long straights. The first day was disrupted by weather that reduced the number of laps available, and the second day suffered extended stoppages due to infrastructure complications. Engineers normally combine simulation data with real laps to adjust ride height for a specific circuit, but Las Vegas offered fewer opportunities for precise calibration. Without accurate feedback loops, the models can underestimate ground contact, which is exactly what happened with both McLaren cars. Another detail presented by McLaren involved the possibility of secondary disturbances following early race contact. Oscar Piastri experienced a collision in the opening corner that damaged his tire and forced an early pit stop. Although the direct damage was limited to the wheel assembly, the impact may have transmitted force through the suspension into the lower structure of the car. Even a slight change in alignment can influence how the floor interacts with the asphalt. The officials accepted that this scenario was plausible but clarified that accidental damage does not change the requirement to present a car that complies with every regulation at every moment of competition. The nature of the Las Vegas circuit itself intensified the wear. The layout includes several long straights where cars reach top speed for extended periods. Under these conditions, the aerodynamic load increases consistently and compresses the suspension for longer durations. When a car remains at maximum speed, the skid block stays closer to the surface and experiences greater friction. The tires also degraded far less than McLaren expected, which allowed both drivers to push throughout the race without reducing performance to manage wear. This combination of high-speed stability and low tire degradation created perfect conditions for the skid block to grind down beyond predicted values. The officials reviewed the explanation carefully but followed the procedure outlined in the technical directive. They measured the surfaces repeatedly using certified equipment with accuracy far beyond the scale of the violation. The values remained identical with each reading, and this consistency confirmed that the skid block thickness was below regulation on both cars. The officials then compared the situation with earlier cases from the same season where the same breach resulted in immediate disqualification. Consistency of enforcement is essential for maintaining credibility within the sport, and the regulation does not allow for leniency once the numbers fall below 9 mm. The final conclusion is that McLaren calculated an aggressive ride height strategy that could not withstand the combination of porpoising, reduced practice time, circuit characteristics, and possible minor race contact. While the margins were extremely small, modern Formula One operates with microscopic tolerances where even a tiny deviation can produce measurable aerodynamic gains. The regulation is designed to prevent such unintended benefits. Once the measurements confirmed a breach of the minimum thickness, the officials were required to apply the penalty. This technical miscalculation became the pivotal moment that altered the entire championship landscape.